Hi there. Welcome back to the Reel Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called Nightmare Alley.
Nightmare Alley, 2021 film, the latest one by Guillermo del Toro, starring a whole bunch of familiar faces, including Bradley Cooper, Cate Blanchett, Toni Collette, Willem Dafoe, Richard Jenkins, Rooney Mara, Ron Perlman, and the list goes on. You're going to recognize so many people in this. This is a big film that I feel like I wasn't even aware was coming out until it basically landed. I'm guessing a little late last year, right? Like, was this on your radar? Do you seek out Del Toro's movies? Like, do you keep an eye on it, on that pulse?
You know what? I don't, even though going to watch Nightmare Alley, I went back to his filmography, and there's so many of his films on there that I love.
Let's go through the list here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start at pretty much the beginning, and this is the letterboxed list here with Kronos. Have you ever checked out Kronos?
Kronos was one of the first Criterions I ever bought from
really?
Future Shop in North Bay, back when we had Future Shop. It's sitting on my shelf now, so yeah, it was a really...
Precious memories.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a really, really neat take on, I guess, the vampire mythos. Mm-hmm. Have you seen it? I'm assuming...
I haven't seen it yet, no. I should have.
Okay, because I was going to say, out of the two of us, I think you're the bigger Guillermo del Toro fan here. So I'm counting on your knowledge and expertise in this arena. No, I know for sure you're the bigger Hellboy fan.
Well, I don't know. I don't know, man. This is
what
the
is
thing.
happening?
I don't really feel that close to Del Toro's work that much. Like, yeah, that's the thing. Kronos, I remember seeing Mimic in theaters when it came out. I really enjoyed it.
That's the thing. Mimic's also sitting on my shelf right now. I love that movie.
Yeah, that's a great disc right there.
Is that Mira Sorvino?
Yes.
Back in the day. I don't know what happened to her career-wise, but she was big in, I guess, the 90s / early 2000s. She was in a bunch of stuff. But
and that was in 97. Was Kronos a lot of creature work and gore and violence as sort of become Del Toro's signatures?
It's been a couple years since I've actually seen it. Not a lot of creature work, but definitely the dark themes, definitely gore. I mean, you got a dude essentially becoming a vampire, so he's eating / drinking a lot of blood and stuff. So there's definitely gore and the supernatural / paranormal element that's pretty typical of Del Toro's work.
And then you have The Devil's Backbone,
which I haven't seen.
That one I would recommend checking that out sooner rather than later. And I mean, essentially the plot there, I think, is like this unexploded bomb is in the center of this orphanage, and there's kind of like a young boy spirit roaming around and kind of terrorizing some of the other people in this place. It's really unsettling. It's really quite a good film. I think I watched it a couple years ago as part of one of those Halloween projects there. But that's one to get back to for sure.
Nice.
And then he follows that up with Blade 2. Oddly enough, he didn't direct the first Blade, just Blade 2 somehow.
Yeah.
Which I don't really remember Blade 2 that well. I mean, the first Blade is pretty iconic.
Honestly, the Blade movies haven't really stuck with me. I'm due for a rewatch. I haven't honestly watched any of them since they originally came out. I think I watched them all once. Obviously didn't leave that much of an impression, but it might be different watching them with fresher eyes now.
Without a doubt. I think that first Blade hit 4K recently, so you can at least enjoy that. And then you have like Ryan Reynolds showing up in the third Blade, so it might be curious to watch that.
Yeah, the third Blade
part
movie,
of his service earlier,
which I've definitely seen.
As I recall, it was awful, but After Blade 2, he moves on to Hellboy. That movie is pretty iconic. I think one of the earlier kind of successful, well, I shouldn't even say earlier. Hellboy was 2004. It was definitely in the midst of a comic book adaptation craze. And Hellboy, I think, was probably pretty faithful to the comics, but his atmosphere, his direction, like, really brought it together. Obviously, Ron Perlman, fantastic collaboration.
Well, I think the subject matter and Guillermo del Toro's sensibilities really meshed really well there. Like, he is very much into the dark, the macabre, the gore, the paranormal, supernatural / kind of sci-fi elements. So I think
Yeah.
if he was going to direct a comic book adaptation, that kind of fit him perfectly. And I think that was like at the peak of kind of Hellboy popularity. I don't know if the comic series is still ongoing or not. I'm not that big into. I was never that big. I don't think I've read an actual full Hellboy comic, so I'm not a big fan of the comics, obviously. So I don't know if it's still ongoing or not. But I don't know how hot a property it was even back then. It was still, I think it was a little bit off the beaten path. Like it's not as popular as say your Spider-Mans or your Supermans. Like your common, honestly, I'd never heard of the comic before the movie came out. So,
and I think there is still some relevancy for Hellboy. Like obviously it got a complete reboot there a few years ago. So I imagine,
wasn't that the one
think
that
in the
you really
comic,
loved? You bought it on 4K, did you not?
You know what? I did. I did. And that's a whole other story upon itself right there. You know, we'll have to link that blog post in the show notes, I think. Definitely well worth the read. I was seeking out just to give you like a synopsis of the story. I wanted to buy Hellboy 1 and 2 on 4K because they just come out. And I inadvertently purchased the latest remake Hellboy, thinking it was the first Hellboy. It was just such a crazy day. I'm still emotionally recovering from it. I can't talk about it too much outside the therapy room.
Poor David Harbour.
Yeah. But after Hellboy, he does probably his most famous film so far is Pan's Labyrinth. It's safe to say we've both seen that. I mean, it's tremendous work.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorites. I think it did it get nominated or it won a bunch of awards back in the 2006-2007 season. Either way, it's a phenomenal film. It definitely holds up, and like just the way you take the fantastical elements and merging them with, you know, historically what's going on in the film and like the wartime elements and kind of exploring you know, trauma. And it's just it's such an impactful film and just told beautifully. It's like essentially it's like a dark fairy tale, which it's a weird thing to say because like originally if you look at like the original kind of fairy tales and the versions, they were all pretty dark, right? Pretty twisted by today's standards, but is definitely Pan's Labyrinth is one of my favorites, perhaps my favorite film by Guillermo del Toro, without spoiling how I felt about Nightmare Alley, but Pan's Labyrinth is one of those ones, like one of those career-defining kind of films, right?
Well, and I mean, honestly, like Pan's Labyrinth and all those older films, like they have a lot of time to gather momentum as a favorite film. Like you have time to revisit it, analyze it more, just appreciate every aspect of it. Newer films, of course, I haven't seen Nightmare Alley as often, but some of these ones are pretty classic. Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, which, as I recall, was pretty good. I thought it was a solid follow-up, and that was the year 2008, so we're 4 years after the first Hellboy. And, I mean, it's pretty safe to say there's a big cult following for the Hellboy movies, and especially Ron Perlman's Hellboy. We were all really crushed that Perlman was not able to return for a reboot. Like a trilogy would have been good. And I'm not sure if Del Toro had a trilogy in mind or anything.
I believe there were talks at the time to do a trilogy.
I've seen the tweets.
I don't know how far along those talks were, but I think that Hellboy 2 didn't quite perform financially up to the studio standard. I remember it wasn't like fans really loved it. Like the hardcore fans of Hellboy, like the movie, loved this, and Guillermo del Toro's fans really loved this, but I'm not sure how much of an actual financial / critical splash it made, and I think it came down to the bean counters in terms of getting that Hellboy 3 and rounding out the that Ron Perlman trilogy, which is a shame.
It's unfortunate. It is a shame because you could see there's a lot of passion behind everyone involved in those projects, and they really weren't invited back. They weren't involved at all after Hellboy 2.
And you see, like, Ron Perlman is like, it's just perfect for that character. The same way, like, you know, like Hellboy is to Ron Perlman as Deadpool is to Ryan Reynolds, right? There's like something about that actor just like perfectly embodied that character, just like fit really, really well. And it really is a shame. I'm not the biggest Hellboy fan, like the movies, but like I thoroughly enjoyed them, and I enjoyed them enough that I'm disappointed that we won't ever get that third in that trilogy, which is kind of a shame.
And how do you feel about the next movie in Del Toro's lineup here, Pacific Rim?
There was a huge following of Pacific Rim. I found
Oh,
like
yeah.
online, people love the heck out of this movie. And
Yeah.
I do enjoy it. It's sitting on my shelf again. Like so many of these are on my shelf. I guess I am a bigger Del Toro fan than I thought initially. Because like so far I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, at least 5 of these on my shelf already.
After this episode, you're gonna have to seek out the other Blu-rays and pick up, like, complete his filmography, right?
I guess I am, because looking at the other ones is like, I guess I'm a Guillermo del Toro fan. Apparently, I didn't know, but I am.
Pacific Rim, yeah. And Pacific Rim, like, we were talking physical media, was one of the first 3D Blu-rays I ever bought, and it was honestly, I think, one of 3 4K Blu-rays that I purchased when they hit the platform. I love Pacific Rim. Just so much fun. It was just, yeah, it was a perfect mix of campiness, action, the violence, the giant robots, the giant monsters. It was just on fire the entire time. Obviously, it got a follow-up, and it really was extremely lackluster, but Del Toro was not involved in that, I don't think, at all. Maybe he produced it or something.
Yeah. No, listen, the action was great. Ton of fun. Yeah, the giant robot on giant monster action, like all the kaiju inspired.
Yeah,
The kaiju influence. Listen, it was a ton of fun. Is it my favorite of his work? No. But also, if you're a fan of this, you need to check out, I believe the Asylum version was Atlantic Rim.
Oh, okay.
And it was one of the few Asylum movies that I've seen, and it is amazing.
Interesting.
You need to check this out. It's just
I'll
like,
put that on my watch list for sure.
it's so bizarre. It's like this alternate reality that Asylum seems to occupy. But I guess I like Pacific Rim enough that I had to watch the Asylum version.
Well, what a great name for it too. It's just like the people making Pacific Rim must have been pretty upset. It's like, oh, they went and took Atlantic Rim. Like,
They took the sequel's name. Yeah.
They took the sequel's name. It's just like, it might have derailed the entire project right there. Who knows? And then we encounter Crimson Peak in
2015.
And this one, I remember seeing this in the theater. This one was kind of big in my area because the intro scene, all the outdoor stuff was filmed in my town, and it was kind of exciting to see what they did to like the old marketplace square behind City Hall. Some of the old buildings from like the 1800s were featured promptly. And then they added in like a whole bunch of CGI background to sort of like extend the city, extend the cityscape, which was pretty neat. But I remember being kind of disappointed in Crimson Peak as a whole, but I always keep meaning to come back to it because surely I was just missing some layers of meaning and depth in that film the first time around.
I'm going to defer to you on this one. I still haven't seen Crimson Peak, but after talking here today, I'm definitely going to check. This is jumped to the top of my list now. I'm going to check this out probably this upcoming week.
And I recall there was a decent Arrow edition of that came out a little while ago that I sort of missed the deluxe special edition on, but you know what? I wasn't too upset at the time, but in the sake of collecting all of his work, it would have been a nice addition to have. And then we come across The Shape of Water, which was a pretty gigantic film, very well known. I think it won a slew of Academy Awards. Did this win Best Picture?
Yeah.
Did you see this movie?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Great film. It was one of those movies that actually lived up to the hype. Because it was one of those things like, oh, everyone was talking about it during award season. I was curious, and so like I watched. It was a little bit of trepidation. Because like, how could this movie be as good as everybody's saying it is? And it was even better than I had hoped. Yeah, it was just visually, Del Toro has this very specific aesthetic, where everything very kind of dark, both tonally and visually, but dark without being like obscuring anything. Like you can still see what's going on, even though things tend to be very darkly lit in a Del Toro movie. But just like thematically, performance-wise, yeah, Shape of Water, it was worthy of all the accolades it got and more.
Definitely not one of my top tier Del Toro movies for me personally, but one I know, and I recognize that. Like when I was watching it, I was like, "This is a really good movie, and it deserves all the awards, it deserves all the accolades, all that stuff." But my personal interests put other things like Hellboy and Pan's Labyrinth and Pacific Rim on top. It's just like, all right, you know what? I recognize this is a significant film, beautifully shot, well written. Like everything about it is good. The acting is tremendous, but it's not one I'm going to revisit very often. if at all.
Yeah, it was. Remember this one? I know it won Best Picture because it was like everyone was making a joke about it. It's like, oh, like the one with the
Yeah.
lady having a passionate love affair with the mutant fish
Yeah,
man.
right?
That one Best Picture is like, because people always talk about how horror as a genre typically gets doesn't get as much respect as like drama or even comedy.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess it's a kind of a horror thriller drama kind of hybrid, but it was definitely a little bit off the beaten path for picks for award season. So, but it was great to see Del Toro getting the recognition that he deserved as well. Which I don't know if any of his other movies really got that same kind of level of recognition they should have. Especially like I think Pan's Labyrinth is a favorite for both of us.
Yeah.
Like that, I think that was. I can't remember. It didn't win. I don't think it was a huge winner, but it should have been for sure.
It should have, yeah. It's tough to say. You'd have to go
And
back.
wasn't, correct me if
take a
I'm
peek.
wrong, but wasn't Del Toro up to direct the Hobbit trilogy before
Oh, geez.
Jackson took
I
over
don't
again?
know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that would have been very early on in Del Toro's career because what was Lord of the Rings movie? Oh, no, sorry. I'm thinking Lord of the
Hobbits.
Rings. The Hobbit came later. And yeah, honestly, he would have been probably a pretty good pick to do those movies. And honestly, probably would have made a better set of films than what we got. Spoiler alert, I thought the Hobbit movies were kind of bad.
Wow. Don't hold back there. Tell us what you really think. It's like, well, they were bad. It was a bad man and he did some bad things to this movie.
Listen, I'm not going to get into the Hobbit movies. I honestly never revisited them past that first theatrical watch. I thought it was just, I don't know. I'm not going to get into it right now, but I didn't think they were good movies.
Yeah, didn't they star that guy? What's his name? Tim from The Office.
Yeah, Martin Freeman.
Was that his name? Has there been anything
Yeah.
else that I would have seen? He can't be that.
Martin Freeman? Maybe a few. I don't know.
He's not that
He probably
big, is
topped
he?
out in The Office. That's probably where he topped out at. In any event, that leaves us with the latest entry in his filmography is Nightmare Alley. And what I'd like to do is just spend a couple minutes to get a first impression on the movie without talking about any spoilers. If we can sort of talk about some of our favorite things, but to give you a brief plot overview, it's essentially about Bradley Cooper's character, Stanton Carlyle, essentially joining a carnival and sort of working his way in with a bunch of the different acts and kind of discovering how things are done and really following a passion to become a mentalist back in the 30s and striking out on his own to do his act around town and strike it rich. And yeah, I mean, that's probably a poor plot synopsis. What else can you say about the overall plot without spoiling it?
No, it wasn't poor. That you just described exactly what the plot was about.
Okay, good.
I don't know.
That's good. I mean,
Sit down on
that's
yourself.
basically it. Yeah. What did you think? No spoilers. What did you think of this movie? What's your recommendation for this movie, and did you enjoy it?
Yeah. So just speaking at a high level, I didn't know what to expect with this movie. Again, like somehow it kind of came in like it was kind of under the radar, considering
Yeah.
like Del Toro was like he's a pretty big name. Like you consider like an
Right.
A-list director, considering his filmography. One of the things I loved actually was not actually a film of his, but like he did an interview for one of the special features for the Dark Knight trilogy,
Okay.
which is really great to hear his interpretation. It's a really great take. I was really, really surprised by Nightmare Alley because I was expecting, I don't know how spoilery this is, but like usually there's some kind of supernatural or fantastical or sci-fi element in his stories. And I kept waiting for that kind of supernatural shoe to drop, and it never did.
Yeah.
This was a straight, this was a straight film noir, not paying homage, but like being a film noir in its own right. And I was really kind of pleasantly surprised and at how it kept building suspense. It was very kind of subtle in terms of the plot development and the character development. Overall, just like, again, it's like a visual feast, I guess. I think Guillermo del Toro loves to focus on the grotesque. And it's so like the carnival setting, with the kind of
Right up his alley.
freak
right?
show, it was perfectly in his wheelhouse, and he captured that aesthetic. Like it's that kind of Hellboy feeling where it's like you have these outcasts but come together and form their own kind of family. And you really get that sense of family and community with the carnival performers, with a few minor exceptions like the caged geek there. The film goes to some pretty dark places.
It was dark. Yeah, that's for sure.
But overall, it's like, I had no idea, like my genre expectations were completely misaligned with what this film actually was. But once I kind of got on board and realized what kind of film I was watching, I was like able to really focus. And yeah, Nightmare Alley was like, this should have been on the marketing campaign. This should have been everywhere. This film. This was such a great movie. The only disappointment I had with the film was that I slept on this so long that I wasn't watching this when it first came out.
And I think that's the issue right now. I mean, we're still in this height of pandemic where, like in Ontario at least, like our theaters closed, they're reopening. Yeah. Things are getting shuffled around, and it's like studios are not willing to put in the giant marketing budgets they normally would have for a film like this, not knowing the state of cinema for when this movie would eventually come back. I don't even know if this was pushed back from an earlier release, maybe in 2020 or earlier. I'm not sure where that lands, but you're right. It seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere. And for myself, I kept seeing little bits. Like I'm looking on Letterboxd and I see some of the people I follow are watching Nightmare Alley, and it's like, oh, click on this. What is this? Oh, Bradley Cooper movie. You know, oh, who's this Del Toro's directing this? Why didn't I get a memo on this situation? Right. Really, it just felt like it came out of nowhere, and it finally became available like video on demand for us to check it out, because I don't recall this hitting the theaters here whatsoever over the past 4 or 5 months or whenever it did. For myself, I thought this movie was really good. I really enjoyed watching it. And exactly as you said, like what a perfect fit for that like 1930s carnival full of sideshow and eccentric characters that Del Toro it's in his wheelhouse. There's a lot of interesting things happening there. And then the movie kind of takes a turn. Like there's a shift that I wasn't expecting where Stanton, this character who wants to break out on his own, he does break out on his own probably 45 minutes or so into the movie. It sort of shifts, it jumps forward in time a little bit onto his own like personal act instead of with that family it built up. But that crew of performers that the movie focused on was just, I mean, talk about an incredible cast of characters, but really interesting acts and history being presented there. But like that family that's represented is just like, oh, you get the sense like these people live with each other, they work with each other, and just what a great group of talent there to bring that alive on screen. It was pretty interesting. And I was honestly legitimately surprised like how gory the movie was, because it didn't necessarily feel like a Del Toro film at first. And it's like, this feels like a familiar story that I would see in a normal drama or thriller.
What are you talking about? Like 5 minutes in, a dude literally bites the head off a chicken and the camera doesn't even cut away.
I know.
Spoilers.
But that's the thing. That's
not gory enough for you?
No. I'm saying I was surprised at how gory it was. And it's like, that was one of the first moments that like set the stage for the rest of the movie. And that's the thing. He's not afraid to move the camera away from those scenes. And it's just like, it lingers. And there's not giving away spoilers. There's other scenes later in the movie that are hardcore acts of violence. And this film lingers. Like it's like giving the effects people proper credit by just lingering on like a brutalized body for an extra 2 or 3 seconds that you wouldn't normally get in any other drama from somebody else.
Oh yeah.
Really, it was really good. I quite enjoyed it, even at the daunting 2.5 hour runtime, which did not feel like it lasted 2.5 hours. It went by quickly.
I didn't realize the length, because normally I'll take a quick look at like the length of the film. I didn't glance at the numbers there. It's usually displayed. I just threw it on, and then like I paused it at one point. I had to go to the bathroom or refill my snacks or something. I was like, oh, like an hour and a half in is like there's still 45 minutes left.
Yeah.
Not that it was like it wasn't dragging or anything, but I was just like, I was surprised that it was going to be that long. I was pleasantly surprised because like there was nothing in there that I would have wanted to cut out. It was really well paced. And I kept wanting, I wanted more and more of like the mystery and the backstory and like the story to keep going on. And it's like, it was almost disappointing when it ended, just because like I wanted to spend more time in that world and have more double crosses and revelations and all this stuff.
Well, that was the thing, and at this point, I just want to say, let's talk about spoilers at our discussion. Don't be afraid to hold back.
Yeah, sorry,
here.
I already mentioned
Obviously,
the chicken getting its head bitten off.
well, that was, you said first 5 minutes of the movie to me is not that much of a spoiler, but
just the fact that they showed the whole thing like without cutting away from the camera, I was like,
it was really crazy.
I'm really curious. I wanted to pick up the physical copy. I just want to see the behind the scenes, how they did that scene, because it looked like it was all done practically. So they must have had some kind of prop chicken.
Yeah, right. It's just
So
a prop
brutal.
chicken, and maybe they CGI a little bit of extra movement in it, but it was really, it was so graphic. It was just like, oh yeah, this is a Del Toro movie. I know what I'm getting into now.
Yeah, and I loved how each of those characters, the carnival characters, you had somebody like Willem Dafoe. They gave him a bit more to do just because he is a phenomenal actor.
Incredible.
But every one of them had their, just like that one little moment, at least like one little speech. There was like the speech where Willem Dafoe was describing, because Willem Dafoe ran the freak show, I think, part of it, where it was like, and one of the freak shows was like this half man, half beast, but he was essentially describing, it just essentially turns out to be just a really like unkempt, hairy dude that he keeps locked up. Yeah. Which is what I was referring to before, is like how this film gets really dark, where they were literally imprisoning. They would take like a drunk or a hobo and essentially get them addicted to opium, and then send them, like starve them enough so that during the show they would throw a live chicken and bite the head off to like shock the audiences. Yeah. But there's that one scene in the diner where Willem Dafoe is essentially explaining this process to Bradley Cooper's character, Stanley, right?
Stantive, I think is his name.
Stan the man, essentially explaining how he lures in homeless drunks, gives them beer dosed with opium to get them super addicted, and eventually like coerces them to being this part of this freak show. And it's like, it was so chilling, but such a great showcase of the writing and of Willem Dafoe's character. I mean, Tony Colletti and the other dude from the Bourne movies. What's his name?
Was it David Strathairn?
Shoot.
Yes, it was David Strathairn. He played Pete.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then you had like Tony Colletti and David Strathairn, who played, was it Zeta and Pete, or Xena and Pete? They had the fortune telling / mentalist part of the show, but that one scene where they were showing him, they took his watch and they were showing the performance of like how they send these coded messages, and essentially he was breaking it down, and like you could see Bradley Cooper's performance, like he was like really affected by this, and it's like, well, how did you know all that stuff? It's like, no, and they broke it down. It's like, well, we're just like doing essentially what they would call today, in the medium business or the fortune telling business, as a cold read, where you're kind of like you're giving phrases as like, oh, you're a private person, but you sometimes like to spend time with friends, right? So you give these like broad statements that apply to everybody. It's like, well, how do you know about my father? It's like, most people have issues with their parents, and for boys, it's most likely going to be with their father. So it's like, it's just like a good guess, right?
It was really neat, them sort of like pulling back the curtain to sort of talk about how these tricks were effectively played, right?
It was really interesting too, is like at the beginning, because like part of that was like, he was asking like, well, why didn't you do like, seances and like, communicate with the dead kind of thing, and do that kind of
spook shows,
they called them. And they were like, no, we never do that, because like it never ends up well. We don't want to give people false hope, and it never ends up well for anybody. So we steer clear of the spook show stuff. We steer clear of the medium and communicating with the dead and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I was like, oh, is that where it's going to go? There's going to be a trick where they communicate with the dead, and he's going to actually communicate with the dead. It doesn't end up being that, but I was like,
you want to hold on, thinking this is Del Toro, it's going to have a supernatural element.
Yeah, because I kept looking for the supernatural element, which wasn't there. So part of it was the genre expectations with that director. I kept playing with me a little bit, and I had to, a little bit of the way into the movie, I had to be like, just watch the movie and just accept what's coming. And if there's a big supernatural twist, then it's okay. But like, watch it for what it is.
Well, I just want to go back to that scene there where Peter, the mentalist, is guessing what's in his hand, like about the watch and stuff. And he's sort of breaking down Stan's character, and coming across all this stuff, because the previous scene is Stan helping this act out, and we sort of get another reveal behind the curtain that there's sort of like a plastic glass floor, and that they're able to convey a few messages to the fortune teller, Toni Collette, on stage by reading questions from the audience that she can guess very accurately. I think the example of the movie was Abigail. It's just like, oh, I'm seeing a name, starts with A, and someone in the audience might freak out. It's like, oh, it's Abigail, right? And it's like the woman is like, oh my God, how'd you know that, right? It's just all this interesting stuff. So Stan knows some of the tricks already of the trade, and seeing him so enthralled, like enraptured with how this trick is being played on him, talking about his watch and his history. And Bradley Cooper's acting in the scene is absolutely incredible. Like you believe this character believes what's going on. It's like, oh my God, maybe there is something supernatural about these people here. Like he absolutely so envious of them. That's essentially what he wants to go to do after. He wants to know all the tricks, and they sort of show him like the code book where, because Toni Collette is the partner, is like the watch is handed to her, and she has a bunch of code words that she would say to signal to her partner what she's holding and sort of like give some clues. It's all memorization, right?
Yeah, really benign stuff. Like, oh, can you tell what I'm holding in my hand from this gentleman? And each of those, depending on the word and the order and the emphasis, it would be telling you, oh, you're holding, it's a watch, or it's a ring, or it's a whatever, and what kind of material and stuff. But it's like they work out this code, which they all have in the code book, which the code book actually becomes like a plot point later on, because essentially that's the entire kind of mentalist act broken down, where you need like, it's like the 2-person act, but essentially it's every trick of the trade. It's like, here's how you essentially learn to become a mentalist. And you see Stan really taking to that. He finds a calling for that because I think part of his character is, you see, like he likes to, I think he takes pleasure in manipulating other people. So for him, the mentalist act is kind of fits naturally, where I think there's that other great scene where the cops come in to shut the carnival down because they learn about the Beast Man. They call him the Geek.
The Geek, yeah.
The Geek, which is like,
I think that's...
It's a general term. I looked it up afterwards.
It's like, that was the act. It's like the Geek is the one who bites the heads of the chickens, right?
Yeah, but it was also, for obvious reasons, the police got wind of this, that they were holding a man imprisoned under very questionable circumstances and conditions. So the cops come in, and they're essentially going through with the warrant. They're just arresting everybody, going to break up the whole thing. And then Bradley Cooper's character, Stan, kind of takes the sheriff aside, and he applies those mentalism tricks and kind of breaks it down. Like those just broad guessing, doing the cold reading, and essentially like finds out, determines or deduces that he's very religious, and so kind of uses that his faith kind of against him. So it's like, I think what's the line that eventually gets to him is like, I think that, the strong man is the one who shows mercy to other people, but eventually he uses his mentalism trick to essentially save the circus there.
And it's so much perception too. It's just like, well, he quickly saw that this guy had a lift in one of his shoes, right? Yeah. It's just like, oh, that in this time, that's probably a sign that this guy had polio as a child, and he explains how he basically broke down all his perceptions of this cop. And I think he also mentioned, it's like, oh, I'm able to guess the name of Mary as someone in his family, because guess what? A lot of people had Mary in their families because of
especially back in the time, it was a religious family. Most likely somebody's going to be named Mary, right? So it's just like playing
exactly
what like mediums do nowadays, and so-called psychics are just like, they play laws of averages and do cold readings or use broad statements and try to narrow things down. Because of course, like you say, oh, there's somebody in your life whose name starts with an M, who died, who you lost at some point. Is like, well, of course somebody at some point is going to have an M in their name who you lost. So it's like, but using that, essentially kind of weaponizing that tool, those mentalism tricks, and using it to his own advantage. You see, it's played as like a heroic moment, but you see that kind of darker tone where he immediately jumps in. Like he hasn't learned a whole lot, but like he took it really to heart about like manipulating people. Yeah. And kind of using them, right?
Yeah. I just want to shout out one of the acts in the carnival. I thought it was hilarious. It was fantastic. It was like, obviously a carnival is full of some grotesque acts and some more adult stuff, but they had stuff for kids there too, right?
Yep.
And it was the woman who had been turned into a spider.
That was
And
freaky.
so the act, it was freaky, and I was laughing. I was just like, of course it makes so much sense they would have something for children, because she's like talking about how as a child she disobeyed her parents and she got turned into a spider because of it. And it's just like a black cloth with the spider that's, kind of like puppeteering, and her face is just out through there, so you can't see her body because it's all hidden. But it looked convincing, right? It's just like,
it was so freaky.
And some of the visuals of the other stuff, obviously we sort of had like the fun house and the house of mirrors, and it's just like, oh, sinners come in and see who you truly are, and the mirrors make them look different. And the Stan meets the love of his life there, Rooney Mara, and I can't remember her name at the moment. Dowdy or something?
No, it's
Molly. Yeah, so he meets Molly, who's like the electric girl, and of course, this is the 1930s here, and it's like you have like the I don't even know what to call them, but like just you could see.
So it's two metal balls that you touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like the visible arcs of electricity going on that are like, I think, really low voltage, so they don't necessarily hurt you.
Low voltage
but,
or low wattage, whatever the one. One
Yeah.
of those will kill you. So it's like high voltage, low wattage, but you can touch it and you can see it. Like when you go to like a science museum now and you touch the crazy ball of electricity and it follows you and your hair stands on end, so you can have a little bit of electricity flowing through you, but they turn into like a big act, right?
And the visuals of that were pretty neat. Like those lightning, the electricity effects was just completely wild. It was really interesting seeing like the production value put into recreating this carnival, and how disgusting everything was too, because it's like they're setting up in basically like a farmer's field type of thing. There's just hay everywhere. It's raining out, of course. I think that must be a Del Toro trademark to have lots of scenes in the rain.
Yeah.
And everything looks muddy. People are dirty. They're wet all the time. They have planks out to walk on. It was just, what an experience being thrown into that world there. It was so fascinating.
Very, very tactile in terms of like you felt like you were actually in this time, in this place. Because it was taking place as World War II was breaking out. So it was late 30s, early 40s. And so that's kind of, really interesting too, how that's kind of woven into the background. Because if you look at this is actually based on a novel. So it was a novel that was actually written in 1946, which is just a year after World War II ended. And then there was actually another movie adaptation in 1947, about a year after the novel was written. And I think, I haven't read the novel. Obviously, I didn't know that this was based on a novel until I saw the movie last night, which Nightmare Alley wasn't even on my radar. But from everything I've read, it was pretty true to the original novel in terms of theme and everything. But you look at the source material, and of course, a novel written in 1946 is going to have those undertones of the big history and the big historical events, which is World War II breaking out. But you kind of see, because it's in America, and America didn't join until, 43 or 44, but really near the end of the war. So like, it was kind of looming in the background, but it was interesting having this kind of looming impending doom kind of hanging over everything.
Yeah.
It really kind of mirrored thematically what was going on, was like as the characters were going through, and there was this looming sense of doom or darkness kind of looming over everything, kind of like how the World War II was just, for America at the time, just in the background and kind of just starting to spread its tendrils over everything and spread its shadow over everything. So that thematically, just having that in there added to the atmosphere really, really well.
And the commentary on the poverty that America would have been in the 1930s.
Oh yeah,
and just how difficult it was. It's like Stan shows up to the carnival and is just kind of offered a bit of a job doing little things here and there. And I think this pay was like $1 a day, right? And
not even a day. It was just like $1 for that one job, right?
Yeah. And it was like a quarter to see one of the acts. It was a quarter to see the geek in action, I think. So 25% of his pay was just like immediately taken off because he'd previously gone in to see this act.
It's crazy because it only cost 10 cents to go take a bath.
Yeah.
So you see I don't know if it was accurate to the relative value of what things were worth at the time, but it's like 10 cents or even 25 cents. Like, that's not an insubstantial amount of money, especially for people in the 1930s, right? Which they were full into the Great Depression by that point.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's why it's so it's such a big motivational thing for Stan coming from this, working in these conditions and wanting to strike out bigger. And basically the movie advances a couple of years after he breaks out of the carnival himself, and he's making tons of cash. He's dressed in tuxedos and things. He's living in like this really fancy apartment, and everything is just really high class all of a sudden. He's just gone into a whole other realm of operating.
Well, it's him and it's Stan and Molly. They strike up this relationship, which it starts off and like they're really sweet, and Stan seems really, really genuine. But then you cut to a few years later, and you can tell that there's some friction there. That like you're watching film noir here, so things aren't going to go perfectly.
Yeah.
And essentially, Stan is putting on this act as a mentalist, putting on these shows, but really he's falling into that. He's kind of in that film noir motif of like the huckster or the charlatan. Yeah. Charlatan. I'm losing my ability to enunciate here. So he's like, there's this kind of little bit of a seediness to the character, a little bit of kind of darkness, and he crosses that line. It's made pretty clear that the spook shows, that the talking to the dead relatives show, which is presented in the film as it is in real life, it's obviously fake, and he eventually crosses that line and does that. But really, they really set that up to show definitively there's a difference between like somebody who's like just like guessing what you have in your hand or guessing what's in your handbag and pretending to speak to a dead relative. Like even the mentalists, Xena and Pete was like, never do that, never do the spook show, never like nothing good will come of that. Stan's like, well, what if we, what's wrong about giving people hope? It's like, no, it's not about.
It's like a false hope that they're giving them.
Yeah, there's one thing between like lying to them about, we knew your name and we pull it out of the ether, and like talking to a dead relative. And I love how later in the movie that actually comes full circle, and there are actually consequences to unforeseen consequences that obviously Stan didn't think about potentially happening. Giving people these cold reads, where like jumping to the end of the movie. Eventually he does do those kind of psychic readings, talking to dead relatives. He says like, oh, you're going to be with your son eventually. Cause he's talking to this elderly couple whose son died in the war. One of the parents wanted them to encourage them to sign up for the draft. Maybe it wasn't a draft at the time, but one of them encouraged to sign up. One of them said his mother is like, I don't want you to go. But anyway, he says something Stan in his reading says, something along the lines of, he goes through and tells him all this stuff about his son, and says, eventually you're going to be with him again someday. And he's saying it just as a way to, he thinks it's a comforting thing, but eventually it leads the couple to, it's a murder suicide. Cause like, I'm going to see my son again someday.
And they're so like, they are buying into the act so much. They 100% believe it. At least the lady does. And it's such a shocking, horrible moment. Like my heart just drops watching it. It's just like, like this mentalist is correct. He's correct, and he's helping our other friend get in touch with another dead person. It's just like, and it's working. That guy even goes so far as to hook him up to like a lie detector that he kind of beats, right? And it's just like, now we have the scientific proof of lie detection, which, as we know, is not that scientific at the end. Yeah. But it's still an element that they relied on. And he beat that. So these others like, well, this must be true. And she's so happy. She pulls out the gun, shoots her husband, and with a smile shoots herself. And it's such a shocking moment on screen. Oh,
shout out to Mary Steenburgen as well. She was the actor who played that role. And she's like, it was just chilling because she's like so happy she's going to see her, because she's like just talking over breakfast with her husband. Is like, isn't that great? We're going to see our son again. And he's like, yeah, that is great. And out of nowhere, she pulls a gun, shoots him, and then shoots herself like in the forehead. And it's like, it doesn't cut away from the husband. Gnarly. And it cut, like when she shoots herself, there's a couple frames where you see the gun go off. It's a couple frames, and that's enough where you start to see the flash of the muzzle and the blood, and then it cuts. But it's just like, it was really chilling, really unsettling. But you kind of see
the violence.
Like
the violence was very unsettling throughout a lot of it, because the other clientele that he had there,
Ezra Grindle, played by Richard Jenkins, who was also in The
Yeah,
Shape of Water. So he's there was actually a lot of
there was.
Guillermo
I mean,
del
Ron Perlman
Toro
was in there too, and
regulars,
he's
right? Like Ron
always
Perlman is obviously a regular for del Toro's work.
yeah. But the violence, like the was his name Ezra,
Ezra.
who pays him like thousands of dollars to do these spook sessions to get in touch with I think a college lover who had died previously.
Well, so the whole his backstory again, very film noir, where she had gotten pregnant. I can't remember whether it was I'm kind of a little bit hazy on whether it was a wife or a lover, but either way, he'd forced her to get an abortion, and she died during this procedure. So he always felt guilty about it, and he wanted to, get a medium. So he was in the market for a medium to be able to touch base with this girl who he ostensibly was responsible for her death and wanted to, cleanse himself of this guilt.
And then he admits to, because this is also kind of like these psychiatry sessions as well, to some degree, with his medium, with Stan, is that he basically admits to really abusing, if not killing, a lot of women after this event over the course of his life.
Ezra,
Like, this guy is really rough, to a point where he sees through the act, because Molly comes in as the dead girlfriend from the past, and they basically kind of blow the scene. Ezra gets too close to her, ends up embracing her. He realizes, oh, this is not what I think it is. And Stan just goes for broke. He's just like, well, he just punches the guy to death. Yeah. And it's the violence, and it's the lingering on the scene of his face afterwards. Like, man, his face is like caved in. It's so brutal.
Like, because you see Bradley Cooper, like Stan, punching him in the face, because he, at this point, there's a sense of danger, because before, like, he kept getting warned, because there's another character, Lilith Ritter, played by Cate Blanchett, who was a psychiatrist. So what happened was, like, at one of the shows, she stood up and challenged them and says, like, you're not really psychic. You're just like, it's a fake act. And he was able to kind of guess what's in her handbag and essentially put her back in her place. But then they start having an affair, and she starts saying, it's like, well, I'll help you by feeding you information about some of these rich socialites so you can have information for your mentalist act. If you give me in return, she doesn't need money, she's already rich. It was like, I just want the truth from you. So I want to have therapy sessions, and you tell me the truth about what's going on. But essentially, Lilith Ritter is kind of telling him, giving him all this backstory about the dead girlfriend and or wife. But essentially what happens, it turns out that at one point she shows Stan that she has this giant scar across her chest and stomach. Mm-hmm. So the implication being that we don't know that at the time, but that Ezra had hurt her at one point, and so she was manipulating Stan to try and get revenge against Ezra. I really love how it wasn't like spelled out super like explicitly.
It wasn't spelled out, and honestly, I was a bit lost there during that like scene of betrayal, so to speak, where Stan's going in and discovers like the money isn't actually there, that he thought the money was in, and she basically goes to shoot him. It's just like, yeah, you discover she's been using him all this time, and she has all his secrets too, because she's recording all these sessions.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So the pieces kind of come into play where, like, because before you saw Lilith, she showed him the scar on her chest and everything, and then Ezra makes this confession. Is like, oh, ever since she died, like his wife or girlfriend died there, I've had this compulsion to hurt other women, and it's almost like this pathology that he developed where he couldn't deal with his guilt and hurt feelings, so he keeps transferring it on and either killing or severely hurting other women. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, the giant scar on her is like, oh, on Dr. Lilith Ritter is like, oh, he was one of the women that he hurt. Mm-hmm. And it all comes together. But like in terms of the act of violence there, which was what started this part of the conversation. Yeah, when he's like, Stan starts beating Ezra and punching him in the face, because like all of a sudden it's like when Ezra makes that revelation, he realizes the danger that Molly's actually in. Because if things go sideways, this guy's just admitted to being an abuser and murderer of women. Yeah. And so he's trying to get him to kneel down and pray, but he gets up close. He grabs Molly and he's like, I'm going to hurt you, both of you. But even though Molly and Stan are having, they're on the outs because Molly knows about the affair, and Molly kept telling Stan, is like, don't do the spook show, don't cross that line. And she tells him that after this show she's leaving him, but he still he doesn't want anything to happen to her. Obviously, he still, despite his being a bit of a jerk, he still cares for her, doesn't want her to get hurt. So like Ezra hits her, and then Stan just goes full Bruce Willis from Sin City mode, where he essentially beats this guy, punches his face in. You see it afterwards, like his nose is all like,
it's
you see like the open nasal cavity. And it's like, I didn't realize he was going that far. And like later when he's cleaning his wounds out, he's pulling pieces of bone and stuff out of his knuckles. And then Holt McCallany, who plays Ezra's bodyguard there, you recognized him from probably from Mindhunter most recently. But he gets it even worse when he gets hit by the car, and he goes flying over, and then he gets run over by the car again. And you see like the bones are all cracked, and his arms are bent the wrong way, and it's like, oh man, just terrible. And all for the crime of being right about Stan the whole time, because like this guy, he never bought into his stuff, into the whole mentalism act, into the whole psychic medium act. But just like, again, that brutal violence, very typical of Del Toro's work, right?
It was so brutal. I was so scared for Molly because she was leaving him and she was about to like get on the train to get out of town, and he basically pulls her back in for that one last time. Then she was so clear. It's like, all right, I'll do this last one for you, and then I am out. And it was just like, as the viewer, is like, this Ezra guy is bad news. The whole situation is going to be really bad. I was so on edge during the entire thing. And it made that ending where he, like Stan himself, is betrayed by everybody he knows. Well, betrayed by the psychiatrist there, Lily.
Yeah, Lilith Ritter, who in terms of like film noir speak, she ends up being the femme fatale.
Yeah, she's great. Cate Blanchett, perfection.
Phenomenal, yeah.
But essentially he's destitute. He's going back to the carnival, finds, people have changed. And the runner of the carnival there,
it's a different carnival this
the
time.
Actor's it's a different one. It's Tim Blake Nelson.
Yes.
I thought it was kind of the same one because he had the jar with the baby in it.
There's a line of dialogue where he says, because in Willem Dafoe's Freak Show earlier on, the other carnival, he has these jars with these preserved like aborted fetuses. It looks like some of them are kind of stitched together to make them look more grotesque, but one is this like baby with this like weird one eyeball in the middle of its forehead. Looks like it's stitched together. But what Tim Blake Nelson, what his character says is, there was a carnival that went bankrupt years back, a little while back, and this guy sold me this item. Yeah. So it's a different carnival. Just to correct you mid-speech here, Brian.
But it's poetic because it comes full circle, because Willem Dafoe's character explained the entire situation or scenario of getting the geek indoctrinated into it, and like, this guy is basically doing the exact same thing to Stan. He offers him a couple drinks. He's about to leave, comes back. It's just like, oh, I have this one temporary job for you to do until I get a full-time geek. And Stan, knowing how badly he screwed up everything, finishes out the movie with that line, I was born to do this role. Like, I was born to be that person.
I was born to do this.
And accepts his fate.
Yeah, it's this weird thing where because he knows the con going on. He knows that alcohol that he's been given is likely laced with opium to try and get him addicted. And he starts laughing essentially at this cosmic joke. But there's a sense of kind of fatalism where he was never fated to be the big city success, the mentalist act. For whatever reason, whether it was, past crimes or whatever it was, but he was always it was almost like fate was pulling him to this direction where he was eventually going to end up the lowest of the low as this carnival act, degraded, eating raw chicken and doped up. And he kind of accepts his fate. It's almost like he's recognizing, it's like, I earned this of all these things that I've done, in the course of the movie, and like hurting Molly and hurting the people that he loved. And, he finds out about the consequence of those socialites who killed themselves because of what he told them, essentially. And then you see kind of flashbacks. You see, essentially, he murdered his father in a roundabout way where his father
was really
his father was sick, and it's the middle of winter.
He's bedridden.
Bedridden, opens the window, super cold, takes the blanket off of him. So essentially he kind of freezes to death in his own house.
Not only does he just take the blanket off him, Stan takes the blanket off his father, wraps himself up in the blanket, sits down and watches his father freeze to death and die in front of him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cold on multiple levels.
Use a winter pun.
But I was really interested in, sorry, I don't know if you had more to say there.
No, just interesting in that whole, it's almost at the end where it's almost like Stan kind of accepts his fate or accepts his punishment and realizes like, yeah, this is a kind of, it's almost like it's funny in a way, but it's also like, yep, I did all these terrible things and now I have to suffer the consequences. And he's kind of in on, it's almost like he's in on the joke, even though it's at his expense.
Exactly.
But it's a really super dark ending without any need for supernatural elements. Or paranormal elements or sci-fi elements, which I kept thinking at the end is like, oh, he's faking being a mentalist. Maybe it's like to hide the fact that he actually can speak to the dead or he can read minds.
This could be a big reveal.
But I'm so glad there wasn't. And it was just like the real terror came, like the psychological trauma and just like the knowledge of what was going to happen to this man, where he was going to be locked in a cage, starved, doped up on opium, forced to perform the most degrading of situations. Like there's something so horrific about that fate.
Horrific and kind of a fitting punishment for this guy who's really taken advantage of a lot of people. We've seen him kill his father. He's killed Pete, the previous mentalist there.
Yeah.
He's just done a lot of horrible things. I was really interested in the ending and how it compared to the book and the previous movie, 1946 for the book, 1947 for the movie. And it sounds like this one really plays accurate to the book. And I think it was the movie, 1947 version, where he sort of gets out of being the geek and discovers that Molly is in this new carnival and she's able to like save him. So you sort of get like a bit of a happier ending. But glad in reading that, it's like, oh, this is sticking true to his real punishment. Like he has to stay punished here. He can't get out of this.
Very dark. It's worth noting that original film, it was made during the time of the Hays Code, which is a very strict kind of moral framework. It's like Hollywood at the time, the censors were really, really strict about what you could and couldn't show on camera or on film. So scenes like where Toni Collette is seducing Bradley Cooper's character in the bathtub, you see some of the stuff that's going on. Whereas like in the original movie in 47, you couldn't show that, or like showing the head being bitten off the chicken, or showing some of the violent, or even showing some of the other carnival employees, like the Snake Man, and there was the short dude there. They actually had like a dude who was covered in hair, like I can't remember what the name of the actual disease is, but where you get like hair all over your face and body. So actually showing some of the scarier not scarier elements, because like those people weren't scary, but like showing kind of the different elements, or like showing the actual freak show and the things in the jars, and like that haunted house that people went into. It was super, super freaky, with like the giant skull door that opened and everything. And
it was pretty wild.
Yeah. But like showing a lot of that, the circus performers or the carnival performers, they couldn't show a lot of that in the 1947 version.
Yeah.
Or show a lot of that seduction or that affair going on between Xena and Stan. So we benefited, I think, from just being in an era where we could delve into some of the more, some of the darker elements of the story that really benefited this genre and this style of filmmaking.
Without a doubt. With all that being said, where does your rating lie for Nightmare Alley?
Oh man. I don't know if we can go back and like redo our top 10 list now. This was, I don't know if we'll quite make the top 10 list, but like.
Yeah, for some context, we recorded our top 10 of 2021 last week. And we still have a bunch of 2021 movies to watch still, and Nightmare Alley just became available to see. And it's like, would this have made your top 10 of 2021?
It very well may have, because I would rate this like a 4 or 4.5 stars out of 5. Like it was just so engaging. Like the dialogue, I don't know if it was pulled right from the book, but some of those scenes of dialogue were almost like Tarantino or Scorsese-esque. And just like the people had these awesome, really meaty dialogue, really meaty soliloquies, I guess you could call them. The atmosphere was great. The acting was, it's so weird. I love Bradley Cooper as an actor, but there's something about his face that is like, every time I see him, I want to punch him in the face. Like he just has has this really punchable face. Like he's just like really smarmy looking guy. I don't know. He could be the nicest guy.
I get worried sometimes when he shows up in a movie where I feel like he's a really fantastic actor. But I feel like he does bring about a certain air with him in his acting and his presence that I was afraid would detract from the movie. But honestly, like he kind of was perfect for this because he brings about this air of, cockiness that this character needed.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper's really great at playing the asshole, and he does kind of here, but he's really, really subdued and really subtle in his performance. He's a great actor. I don't know. His face just rubs me the wrong way. I want to punch him in the face. But you look at like all the performances, like Toni Collette,
I'm shaking my
and
head.
Ron Perlman and Rooney Mara. I wish Rooney Mara had been given a little bit more to do because she's kind of sidelined a bit more in the second half. Her character's really interesting, and I wish we could have delved a little bit more into that.
Well, it really would have been beneficial to have more of her in there because she was like kind of leading her own act as the electric lady there.
Yeah.
And when she becomes the partner, like of Stan doing the mentalist act, it's like they really downplay what she's doing, I think, when she's a critical part of the role. But I guess with the plot of him going out to do the spook show stuff as the medium, she knew she would never cross that line, right? Like 100% she's upfront and honest throughout the whole thing.
Yep.
It's just like she's not going to cross that line. Her carnival family is more important, and the rules that that family shared were more important. But yeah, I mean, Rooney Mara is great.
Yeah, she's a great actor, one of the best of her generation. Kate Blanchett as the femme fatale. You could tell something was up with her right away, which you should. You weren't sure what it was, but there was definitely something kind of off about her the whole time. Kate Blanchett, as always, knocks it out of the park. Just the atmosphere, everything was filmed. Maybe it's because I do have a soft spot for film noir that, you go back to all the classic old black and white films. Yeah. And I think there's I was reading online that there is a black and white version of this movie
really?
Circulating around somewhere. That there's an official release. It'd be really, really interesting to see that black and white version really get into that film noir kind of feeling. But yeah, I absolutely, I love this. And apparently, as a surprise Guillermo del Toro fan, I didn't know I was. I guess it's not really a surprise because apparently I love most of his other movies to begin with. So maybe I was already primed to like this. But just everything from the writing to the cinematography.
Is this a 5-star rating for you right now?
I haven't actually rated it. I would say 4 to 4.5, I think, which would put it up with my 4.5 would put it probably higher than most of my top 10 list, actually. So from 2021. So it may very well.
Yeah, you got to be careful deciding those ratings.
But yeah, overall, just is a great film and exactly the kind of film that we should be supporting as audiences to get more of this great content. Again, that's a little bit different, a little bit darker. Not everybody's cup of tea, but I love that we're able to get this out there. I'm not sure how financially successful this movie has been. I know it just came out recently for home release, but in terms of theatrical run.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how much you can really glean from box office numbers right now, although you have something like Spider-Man, which is just like breaking records not everywhere. But I'm just looking at it. I mean, this would be a failure. It says a budget of about $60 million and a box office draw of $23.3 million. We might see bigger numbers worldwide. I'm not sure if that's a domestic or worldwide number, but obviously it comes in under expectations there.
Man, that's so disappointing. Just because it's going to be another data point that studios are going to use to not make movies like this anymore. And it's a real shame because it's a phenomenal movie with great performances, great direction, great, like you were saying, like just the set design and like everything feeling really gritty and grimy and feeling like you were in Depression era, US, and getting that sense of these are people who are not well off and who are just scraping by, trying to make a buck. And like like any good film noir should, you felt the grime of that kind of seedy underbelly of society. It was great. How about you? What did you think of this film, Brian?
Especially with that ending, I settled directly on 4 stars.
Nice.
And I'm hoping that I'll be able to revisit this one. And, thinking about that top 10 list, this would have been an honorable mention, if not on the list in like number 9 or number 10 spot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But I think this one goes the distance and probably beats out some of the ones that I did mention that I know I won't revisit those movies. But this one, I really hope that I will be able to rewatch it at some point. I think it's easy.
I think one of the things that really sells a movie for me is like after watching it, I immediately want to go back and rewatch it. And immediately after watching that final moments of Nightmare Alley, I immediately wanted to go back and just rewatch it again. If it hadn't been like 12:30 at night and I wasn't super tired, I might have actually gone back and started watching it again. It was just like I was that engrossed in the movie.
This sounds like it's going to be an easy 5 stars for you in a couple of years next time you watch it.
It may very well be. For me, it's easily top shelf Del Toro. It just goes to show that he's just one of those directors, never really peaks. He's always putting out something. He's always putting out quality goods. And you're never going to be disappointed in his work. That, of course, I haven't seen Crimson Peak yet, so that remains to be seen because I know that was not critically well received. But considering how poorly received Nightmare Alley seems to have been, and how much I seem to enjoy Del Toro's work, I'm actually really looking forward to watching Crimson Peak now.
Honestly, definitely go watch that Crimson Peak. I will be rewatching it soon. It's been a few years and it needs that. It looks like the only Del Toro movie that I haven't seen is Kronos, the very first one. And there's no excuse for me not to go watch that, in the next few days. So,
do yourself a favor. Brian, go watch Kronos. Everybody else, go watch every Guillermo del Toro movie. Go watch every Guillermo del Toro movie you can get your hands on. There's a reason that he has developed such a loyal fan following. It's because his work is just, it's top tier. It's definitely,
without a doubt,
he's definitely one of the best directors working today. And I always love, or I appreciate the fact that like you have somebody like Del Toro or Tarantino who has like maybe 10 or 11 films under their belt, but you can see like just the level of effort and how much of their themselves that they put into these movies. Yeah. And you see why. It's like, oh yeah, they only have 11 movies, but like 10 of them are, probably 4 to 5 star movies, right?
Yeah, this guy's he's firing on all cylinders with every single film he puts out. Although I can't speak to Blade 2, but everyone has to do a studio film at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate if you could leave some feedback, such as a rating on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening on. And feel free to send us an email to realfilmchronicles@outlook.com. We love some suggestions, questions, or general comments and would enjoy including them on an upcoming episode. Until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep your film journey going.